Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the Garden Hour. I am Gwen Funk. I'm with MU Extension and I am a field specialist in horticulture. I am coming to you from Northwest Missouri up in Holt County along the river. We have a good show for you today. Hopefully you'll be able to come walk away with a little bit of nuggets, with some nuggets of information. I'll get my flow here going here in a minute. Just as a reminder, we have several horticulture specialists that are scattered throughout the state. And so you can kind of find your company and your county, and then also the person that's kind of associated with your county. But we don't always follow those rules. We go across county lines. So if you want to reach out to anybody on this list with a question, we are happy to help you. Just as a reminder, we are live streaming this on YouTube, and you can see the address there on your screen. We also record this, so you can go back at any time and find the archived copy that you would like to watch. And then we also have some snippets that are there. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce Zack, and perhaps he can get us started on our weather forecast.
Great. Thank you, Gwen. And it's currently sunny in Columbia. Temperatures are warming up, and I know it's similar statewide, and I think we all deserve some nice weather after the really extreme weather we've seen over the past several days here. But I did want to start by looking back at the month of February for Missouri here. And it's probably no surprise that it ended up as a very mild month. So we see our statewide average temperature for February was nearly 8 degrees above average. And it was actually Missouri's ninth warmest February on record. And that's with records going back to 1895 there. So after a cold January during a cold time of year, we really rebounded with a mild end to winter there in February. The other thing to note about February is that it was a very dry month. Really, the only significant rainfall we saw was around Valentine's Day, and we really didn't have any significant snow as well. So we see there our rainfall or precipitation during February was about half of what we usually see. And that's the second month in the calendar year of 2026 where we've seen drier conditions here in Missouri. If we go back even farther, this is actually our seventh consecutive month back to last August with below average precipitation here as a state. So precipitation, if we look over that past August to February 7-month period, we've received 11.73 inches of rainfall on average across the state, which sounds like a lot, but we usually see about 20 inches during that period. So we're here about 8.5 inches below average on rainfall since August, and this is the state's third driest August to February of all time. So as we finished up February there, we were quite dry. The good news is that once we got into spring and our month of March here, the weather cooperated and we've kind of been in this rainy and then snowy to end it pattern as well. So March so far, we've been wetter than average for nearly the entire state except for far northwest Missouri and up in Gwen's area there. So, but otherwise we see lots of green on this map, which is anywhere from 2.5 to 5 inches of rainfall, but even some spots along I-70, but particularly in the eastern Ozarks from Salem over to St. Genevieve here, we saw some flooding even with totals so far this month over 5 inches, and we're only just about over halfway through the month. So wetter, but we've also seen those mild temperatures for the most part continue. So even though we've been very cold the past few days, we see the first part of March really weighted temperatures to be above average at this point. Along with all this rainfall, we have had severe weather, which is to be expected here in Missouri during the spring. So here we see for March, as we've gotten all this rainfall, the green dots or green squares show where we've seen some hail in scattered locations around the state. The blue shows damaging winds, and we've even had a few tornadoes. So including in Texas and Shannon County, one pretty close to Cape Girardeau and down in the Boot Heel as well. So an active start to the month there. What's maybe been more interesting, and especially thinking about the garden, has been our temperatures so far for March. So these are the highest temperatures we've seen across the state, but no matter where you are, we've seen temperatures in the 80s already. But here you see in temperatures in St. Louis, for example, getting up to 87, but a lot of locations getting into the mid 80s, which is remarkable for early March here. But on the other hand, we've also had some very, very cold temperatures so far as well. So these are the lowest temperatures we saw across the state over the past few days during this cold snap. Single digits, but everybody was in the teens as well. Kirksville was our coldest temperature there, with a low of 3. So unfortunately, if you did have some things greening up, or you were bold enough to start planting in late February or early March, those cold temperatures might have been enough to kill whatever was coming up there. So we'll have to see how that impacts the rest of the spring here as well. I'll just quickly show this, but we also did have some snowfall, mainly for northern Missouri, that came along with those cold temperatures. So that was pretty notable there, especially with how warm we had been prior to the snowfall. So looking ahead, we are in spring, as I kind of mentioned, and we've seen this kind of wet pattern here for March, but that's what we generally expect. So we go from the state on average, our driest month in February, and March is kind of a transition here, where we see about 3.21 inches of rainfall as we get to our wettest months, which usually occur from April to September. So on average, we kind of expect to see more rainfall here, and we're certainly seeing that so far. And I bring that up because this is a good thing. As I mentioned, the precipitation deficits earlier, we need this rainfall. And the most recent U.S. Drought Monitor map here shows most of the state still has a lot of either abnormally dry or moderate drought, but we even have more severe conditions up in far northeast Missouri and across the Arkansas border there as well. So what can we expect ahead? Well, our extreme cold is behind us. If you've looked at the forecast for the next week, very mild, maybe a great weekend for some yard work and garden work. In fact, here are our temperatures by Saturday. We're back up into the low to mid 80s there. But I do want to show this reminder here, and I think I showed this last month as well. Unless you're in St. Louis or the Boot Heel, which typically see their last freeze around the last week of March, the rest of Missouri typically sees on average freezing temperatures, the last one into the first and second weekends of April. So it could be mid-April before you're completely safe from seeing that last spring freeze there. Soil temperatures, currently I did want to show these. These are our 2 and 4 inch soil temperatures, but I'll note they're influenced by that recent cold here. So pretty chilly right now, 30 degrees to 40 degrees in the 2 inch, but in the 40s at the 4 inch. But with that forecast, I think those will increase here soon. Also looking ahead, here's the next 7 days, dry. So no rainfall really expected in Missouri. Maybe a couple showers or passing clouds, but it's really going to be a remarkable stretch of weather here with warmer temperatures and no precipitation. So again, good to get outside there. I'll end by showing some of these Climate Prediction Center outlooks here. This is the 8 to 14 day outlook valid for the last week of March, and we see lots of red on the left here. So predicting a high probability of above average temperatures. So this mild stretch of weather we're going to see over the upcoming week, looking to continue through the end of the month here as well. Precipitation kind of points to near normal there, but one thing I take away is we don't see a signal for a big wet pattern. So would maybe like to see a little bit more rainfall in the forecast there by the end of the month. And then we know there's some uncertainty, but I do want to show this is the 3-month outlook for March through May here. Not much for Missouri. We see we're on the edge of maybe some warmer temperatures, but if we look on the right here, really stuck in what we call equal chances of drier or wetter conditions. So we'll have to see going farther into the season how that plays off, but mainly we can probably expect this mild conditions to continue here into the spring. But otherwise, that's all I've got for you all, and enjoy the nice weather coming up.
Oh, thank you, Zach. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the weekend, especially after that cold bit that we just had. And we
Yes.
still have a little bit of snow on the ground up here too, so in some shady areas anyway. All right, I am going to do a short presentation here on shamrock plant. So I wanted to go ahead and let me do a little bit of finagling with my screen. All right, I thought this might be timely since we just passed St. Pat's Day yesterday. Often these little plants you'll see in some of the big box stores and around just to kind of get people in the mood for St. Patrick's Day. So it's often marketed pretty heavily during this time. So this is commonly called a shamrock plant. And I kind of fell in love with these when I was younger because the leaves would close up at night and then they would open back up during the day. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And they're just a fun, delicate, whimsical little plant. So I really liked having them in my house. But you have to know a little bit about their growth pattern because a lot of people think that they die and they're really just going through some dormancy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So what is a shamrock plant? Well, it's a common name for several oxalis species. So it's not necessarily a true shamrock. It's really a false shamrock. They are native to South America and Southern Africa. The true Irish shamrock is actually a Trifolium dubium, and it's a little yellow clover. But you can see the different parts here. You can see that we have the rhizome underneath, which I think is kind of interesting in itself because it has all of these little scales. You see the hair-like roots, and then you have the three leaves here, and then the flowers. And there are lots of different variations of this, and they've cultivated them quite a bit over the last few years to give us some different variations. But here is what the true Irish shamrock looks like. And you can see it looks like what our traditional clovers might be. But it is a popular seasonal and year-round houseplant. Mine will bloom even in the depths of winter. So I want to talk about light requirements. And this one is actually a variation that has purple leaves and pale purple flowers. But their light requirements generally are bright indirect light is preferred, and to avoid the intense direct midday sun, because these, like I said, these are kind of a delicate plant. They can get sun scorched pretty easily. However, if they have too little light, then they won't bloom. So there's kind of a happy medium there. And I would like for you just in the chat real quick, do you think that this is a good placement for this plant? And Traven or Kate, I might have you kind of monitor the chat here real quick. But if you take a look at the picture and see where that shamrock is placed, is that a good place? What do you think?
Gwen, you're getting a lot of comments. Nope, too much sun.
Absolutely. It is right out there on that hot patio. So it really probably, should be kind of further back so it gets a little bit of shade. Maybe not direct shade, but it needs some filtered light for sure. Okay, for the soil and watering, you do want to kind of keep the soil moist through the growing season. You can see on this picture too, the variation on the leaves, which I think is kind of cool. They just have a lot of interesting little facts about them or in their appearance. But with watering, you want to allow the surface to dry slightly between watering, because if you overwater, then that could cause some, they don't like that. The leaves will turn yellow and die. So you don't want to overwater them, and then use well-drained potting soil in your pots. Now, these plants will go dormant, so you do not want to water them when they go dormant. And what will basically happen is that all of the leaves will just kind of die, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on with this plant? And then you wait a while, and you'll start to see new growth coming from those little rhizomes that I showed earlier. So for overall, the ideal temperature range is about 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what most of our houses are. I take mine outside during the summer. I just don't put them in bright sunlight. They prefer a cooler night. And then I just have a very dilute fertilizer, just a light fertilizer during active growth. But then when they go dormant, I just kind of set them off out of sunlight, not necessarily in the dark, but just kind of more in the shade, and just kind of wait for them to reactivate. So here's a picture of the dormancy stage. So it is a natural cycle of growth for these plants. And like I said, the leaves may die, they yellow and die back. And at this point, you just want to reduce the watering. And if you can see here, it's kind of hard to see with all of the other debris in the background, but here is a new little shoot that is starting to pop up out of the soil. And before too long, the whole pot will be filled with new growth. So that's really kind of cool. But that is a normal growth stage, so you don't want to throw it out at that point. So some common problems, if you do see the yellow leaves, but they just don't look quite right, it may be an overwatering issue. So you might want to reduce your watering. If you have sparse, oh my gosh, sparse, I still can't say it, sparse growth, that's usually insufficient light. And that happens to mine during the winter because there's just not enough light that comes through my windows during the winter time, but in the summertime, it's fine. If the leaves just kind of drop, that's probably going into dormancy. And then they may get some problematic pests like aphids or mites. And I found it easier just to hand pick those off or smash them with my forefinger and thumb and kind of monitor it that way and before it gets out of hand. But if you can kind of keep your plants like with a fan blowing on them, just a light breeze over that and then not overwater, that kind of helps reduce some of the pest problems as well. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to put some things in the chat again. I'm going to give you either a myth or a fact, and I want you to tell me whether or not which you think it is. So here's our first statement. The plant is dead after leaf drop. So real quick in the chat, is this a myth or a fact? I'm going to do a slow count to 10. And again, Traven, if you wouldn't mind monitoring.
Lots of myths.
I think you are correct. It is a myth. The fact is that it's probably going dormant at this point, so don't throw it out. Okay, here's another statement, same thing. This plant needs constant watering. Is that myth or fact?
It looks like myth is taking it again.
All right, you are correct. That is myth as well. It needs less water during dormancy, and it is sensitive to overwatering. So you need to kind of monitor that a little bit. And the last one, the leaves closing means stress. I didn't really talk about this one, so this may get a little bit more of a mixed response.
Say we have myth and there's a couple facts poking in there. So yeah, go ahead and explain further, Gwen.
Okay, well, that is a myth. And if you remember at the very beginning, the thing that charmed me the most about these plants was that the leaves close up at night. And that is a normal light response called nyctinacity. And the leaves will just fold up during the nighttime and then unfurl during the daylight. And it's just really kind of fun to watch. All right, so just key takeaways. Bright indirect light is best. You want to avoid overwatering. Expect dormancy, and it can be a long-lived houseplant with proper care. I've had mine for years, and I've even been able to divide them and give them out as gifts. So it's been a fun plant to grow. All right, thank you all for playing along in the chat with me. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions and want to learn more about it, you can contact your local extension office or look online, try to find some research-based gardening resources. All right, with that, I will stop sharing I believe I have to get my screens back here. So sorry, just a minute. It takes a minute for me to get it all back. Okay, yes. Next we have Katie, who is going to talk to us about some colonial plants and old world versus new world. So Katie, it looks like you're ready to go.
All right. So a few weeks ago, I was asked to do a presentation on different things about colonial plants to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. So this was kind of a fun topic to research and figure out more about. So today I'm just giving you a small piece of that. And we're going to talk about plants that were old world versus what was here and what colonists brought over. So some of these may surprise you. Some may be unfamiliar, and we're just going to hit on fruits and vegetables. So why were plants important in colonial America? They provided food, of course, clothing, medicine, home goods, beverages, flavorings, still the things that plants do to this day. So plants were important then, they're still important today. However, more people in colonial America were closely related and took care of the plants compared to now, where many are removed from actual plant care. So first off, some old world crops. So fruits, we think about Johnny Appleseed and as American as apple pie. Well, the reality is apples came from Central Asia. They were brought with the settlers, and they were mostly used in colonial America for hard cider production. So they were eaten and cooked, baked, dried. But that hard cider production as drinking was their main use. They were also used to make vinegar for food preservation and cooking, and also livestock feed, particularly if you're pressing apples for cider production. That byproduct, the leftover, also became that livestock feed. Peaches originated in China. They were grown in more of the southern colonies. Think about the freeze we saw this week that may damage peach crops here in Missouri. So southern colonies with that early bloom date for peaches is helpful. They were used a lot as livestock feed, actually. Some specialty alcohol production and brandy production. They were eaten fresh, baked, preserved. And they were easy to grow from seed, so their use rapidly spread in colonial America. Pears were from Europe, North Africa, and Asia. They were eaten fresh, cooked, or preserved. They made perry out of those, which is the pear version of hard cider. And fridge varieties were grown along the Hudson Valley and into Long Island. Plums, there were European, Asian varieties, and of course we do still have native varieties of plums here in the U.S. They were eaten fresh, baked, or preserved, also made into wine and cordial, and this was one of the fruits that they did quite a bit of grafting on. Quince, this may not be one we think about as a fruit crop. Typically, it was used for jellies and preserves and flavoring added to apples and pears. Also in medicinal syrups and grown mostly in New England orchards. So to me, when I hear something that's added as flavorings, you don't see anything in medicinal syrups, you don't see it eaten fresh. That usually is kind of an indication of the flavor of it. So not one that was eaten fresh. Cherries from Europe, Western Asia, and Northern Africa. They were eaten fresh, dried, cooked, and baked. Also, of course, some more alcohol made into wines, and typically found in New England gardens. So cherries really do better in northern climates. And then grapes, there were European varieties and, of course, native varieties. But wine, again, alcohol seems to mostly be top on the list of our fruits where they were used. One, it was a way to preserve them, and also the fact that water sources a lot of times were contaminated, so alcohol killed problems. Raisins, vinegar again, and they were also eaten fresh. So some old world vegetable crops. Cabbage was from the Mediterranean region. It was a staple winter vegetable because it kept well, typically boiled with meat in stews or pickled as sauerkraut. Carrots were native to Central Asia and another staple winter vegetable because they keep very well. And they were eaten cooked in stews, mashed, boiled, or raw, and also used in a sweetener or in puddings. So carrot cake is a great one. Onions were native to Central Asia, used as a flavoring or medicinally for colds and infections. And garlic, similarly, from Central Asia, again, used as a flavoring medicinally, and typically more so for infections, digestion, and respiratory issues. Some other old world vegetables, cucumbers, were from South Asia. They were eaten fresh, sliced with vinegar, so still the same today. Pickled for winter preservation and recommended crop in some of the early colonial garden manuals. Peas were native to the Mediterranean region. They were eaten fresh, dried, used in porridges or soups, and also served as an alternate protein source when meat was scarce. Some other ones, turnips were native to Central Asia. They were hardy, easy storage because they keep well, boiled, mashed, added to stews or soups. The nice thing about turnips is you can also eat the greens, and they were additionally used as livestock feed. Spinach, native to Central and Southwest Asia. They were used boiled, added to soups, plain or mashed. And available in all households. So rich or poor, didn't matter. Spinach was one of those kind of crops that was readily available to everyone. Radishes, native to Southeast Asia, they were eaten raw, added to salads, and nice because radishes are quick, one of the earliest vegetables available in the spring. And because they are so quick, they could do succession planting with them. So radishes were popular crop. In the old world, there were also some that we kind of considered elite vegetables. So you had to have more help in the garden in order to have some of these. Some of them are more like eggplant, native to Asia. It was more of a curiosity. It was kind of an exotic vegetable. So it was used in savory dishes or fried or stewed. Broccoli and cauliflower were native to the Mediterranean region. They were labor intensive. So think those caterpillars that get on them, they more labor intensive to take care of those. So they were boiled, buttered, or stewed, and they were recommended for planting in Randolph's Treatise on Gardening for colonial vegetable gardens. And then lettuce, which we think of as very common, and most everybody has access to lettuce. I have lettuce growing in my office right now. But it was native to the Mediterranean region, fresh salad. It was considered more of a luxury crop, and it had a really high value in colonial towns like Williamsburg. Now moving on to crops that were native to North America or any of the Americas and how they moved. So as far as fruits goes, berries were very much native to North America. They were used fresh, dried, preserved in sauces or baked goods. So those crops include blueberries, cranberries, and cranberries not only were eaten, they were also used for dyes and medicines. Strawberries, our modern strawberry is actually a cross between a Virginia native strawberry and one from, I believe, Asia. Raspberries, blackberries. So still we find these in the wild today. Some other fruits. I mentioned that they imported grapes, but we also had native grapes to North America, like fox grapes and muscadine grapes, once again used for wine and raisins. Pawpaws are kind of a unique North American fruit, eaten fresh and very seasonal. It was definitely for fresh use because they do not keep well. Cherries. I talked about cherries in Old World, but we also had native cherries. So choke cherries and black cherries, plus plums that we have that are native. Once again, used fresh or dried. And then the wines, vinegars, and medicinal syrups. Some other minor fruits that were native, persimmons, mulberry, serviceberry. And then there were also some tropical fruits. So the southern Spanish colonial regions included guava, papaya, and pineapple. And I include nut crops with fruits because they grow very similar, but North America did have lots of great nut crops. Top of those was probably in the Appalachian region that American chestnut. They were used roasted, ground into flour, dried for storage, and also as livestock feed. A lot of livestock was free ranging, so the nuts provided food for them. And unfortunately, the chestnut blight, American chestnut just is no longer the king that it once was. They're still doing lots of research to try to get around some of that chestnut blight. Hazelnuts, fresh baking storage, and they were also used for oil extraction in household use. Acorns had a lot of indigenous use, and colonists only used those in scarcity if they really had to. So acorns weren't preferred by the colonists. Black walnuts, fresh, baking, or in storage. A lot of times oils were extracted for cooking, also for wood finishing and lamp fuel. The hulls of black walnuts make a great brown dye, and they were also used as livestock feed. Pecans, fresh again, baking, storage, oil extraction again, and pecans were actually valued as a trade item. And then hickories, fresh for baking or storage. A lot of these trees also had other values as far as lumber and different products that way too. Another New World crops as far as vegetables go, beans. So if you're familiar with the three sisters that the indigenous Native Americans perpetuated, it's having the corn and the beans that curled up the corn and also provided nitrogen for the corn. And then at the base, pumpkins or squash that provided shade for the roots and help with weed control. Those beans were used fresh or dried, another protein substitute, and soil improvement because of that nitrogen fixation. Squash and pumpkins were used boiled, roasted, stewed, or baked, also used as livestock feed because they were a great storage crop for the livestock and for us eating them. Sunflowers. So a lot of times we think about sunflowers as ornamental nowadays, but the seeds were eaten raw or roasted. There was oil extracted from the seed, and the seed meal was used in bread and porridges. Some other New World crops included potatoes. Potatoes were viewed with suspicion. They are native to South America. But that nightshade family just was a rough sell for a while. But adoption in the 1700s because they were easy to grow in poor soils. Of course, boiled, mashed, roasted, and many other uses. Tomatoes were grown as an ornamental plant, another one of those in the nightshade family, so lots of suspicion regarding those in the nightshade family. So it took a lot longer for adaptation of tomatoes, typically early to mid 1800s for it to be used for eating. And then peppers were more readily adopted in the South in areas of the Spanish or Caribbean influence. They were used as seasonings for stews, soups, and meats, pickling, and then medicinally as a warming agent or digestive aids. And then finally, peanuts were native to South America. They were mainly grown in the southern colonies, typically a lot of them as livestock feed. And then the peanuts were also roasted in oil extraction. And sweet potatoes were another southern colony crop, baked, roasted, boiled in puddings or pies, also for storage. And they were actually more popular than the regular white potatoes because of those potatoes being in the nightshade family. So hopefully you learned a little something about some unique crops, and also think about, the old world was also a very different place because the Italians didn't have tomatoes, the Irish didn't have potatoes, and the Russians didn't have potatoes either for making vodka. So there's a lot of the world is quite a melting pot, and we receive lots of crops, and Europe and Asia and other countries also receive lots of crops from us. So it's quite a melting pot and a bunch of interesting history. At least I think so, because I am a plant nerd.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Any questions for Katie? I know I have to rethink my idea of Italy because of the tomato issue and Ireland because of the potato. We just kind of associate those things, but we just need to remember that those are not, that's not how it was back then.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting. We had a question in chat. Why was the nightshade viewed with suspicion?
Nightshade, most of the plants in the nightshade family are poisonous. So that is why they took a lot longer to be adapted, because a lot of the wild relatives of potatoes, eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes are in that nightshade family. All of those four are. But other relatives that are in that nightshade family are typically toxic.
Yeah, I think, and belladonna kind of falls in that as well. You may mention that. Another question, why were acorns shunned?
I think partially because it takes a lot of work to make an acorn edible. A lot of times it takes a lot of boiling and processing to get the tannins out to make them edible. Certain acorns are edible for people more so than other kinds. So more of a cultural thing, I think, in part. And not that the colonists did a lot of work with growing and harvesting and foraging and all of that, but I think it was just preference in what they were used to.
Yeah, and it's in the chat. They're very, very bitter. So yeah, thank you for that. It's all good information.
On pie before, and it was very good, but I didn't have to fix it either. So
there you go. All right. Next we have Todd, who is going to talk to us about pressure treated wood for raised beds. Some of you may be thinking about constructing your own raised beds for this upcoming spring. And so it's always good to get some information about the construction materials. So Todd, I don't know, do you have your own, are you going to share your own screen or?
I can do it. Traven, I think, has my slides either way.
I do too. Oh, you've got it. Oh, Traven's got it going. Okay.
Here we go.
There we go.
Excellent.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
I get a lot of questions. Hey, can I use pressure treated wood for raised beds? And is it safe to use? And so what I'm going to do is in the next slide is to give you the bottom line up front. Yep. Right now, you can use pressure-treated lumber if it's been produced in the last 15 years. It is considered safe to use in food-producing gardens. Why is that? Why the last 15 years? Well, that'll be on the next slide. Thank you. So let's talk about what is pressure-treated. So there's a chemical treatment that goes into the wood that makes it more rot resistant. And modern pressure treated wood has been treated with a copper containing compound. Now, if you look at the tag on the picture on the right, it says micronized copper azole. So that is one of the compounds used. The other one is alkaline copper quaternary. You get a lot of these tongue twisters here, but if you look in it, if it says MCA or ACQ, those are safe to use, and they're designed for ground contact. So that's the other thing that you want to look for is, are they suitable for ground contact? Now, if you look at the tag and it says CCA on it, then do not use that. So after 2004, the lumber was treated with either MCA or ACQ. But before that, it was very common to use CCA, and the A stands for arsenic. And arsenic, among other things, is a carcinogenic compound. So CCA lumber has not been available to the general public since 2004. But if you had some stored in a shed or garage or a barn, if you grab that, you might want to check and see what the tag says, because it's possible you could have had some CCA lumber there for a period of time that you didn't use. Another rule of thumb is that if there is no label, then don't use the lumber for raised beds for food production. So you can generally tell the color by the color, whether it's been treated. Treated wood tends to be a little darker than untreated wood. It tends not to age to a gray color, but more stays rather dark. When it's fresh, it might even look green. So just pay attention to what those labels say. And again, if you think it's treated and there's no label, I would recommend that you do not use it. Next slide, please. Now, next question is copper, is it toxic? Well, copper is one of the 17 essential nutrients for healthy plant growth. But in excess, copper can be toxic. So the picture on the right kind of shows you both the copper deficiency and copper toxicity issues. Pictures and kind of describe some of those symptoms. And if you look at the symptoms for each, they're very similar in many cases. So does this copper move away from the wood into your soil? That's the big question. But before I move on to that, I want to tell you, if any of you raise sheep, you need to prevent your sheep from cribbing, chewing on pressure-treated lumber. Sheep are very sensitive to copper levels. And if you own sheep, you know that you have to purchase a different type of mineral salt than is used for cattle and goats. And that is because it has lower copper levels in it because of the sheep's intolerance to the levels for cattle. So keep that in mind. Either do not use pressure-treated lumber if you have sheep, or to fence it off so that they can't get to it. So let's talk about leaching. Does the copper leach out of the lumber and into the soil? The short answer is yes, but it really doesn't move very far. It might move down into the ground beneath your bed, but studies have shown that elevated copper levels 4 inches from the edge of where the lumber is just really are not elevated any significant amount. The highest amount of extra copper in the soil would be at the 1 inch level, 1 inch from the wood, and even that is not elevated to the toxic levels. So studies really reinforce that the movement of copper from pressure-treated lumber into the soil is not something that you need to be concerned about. And next slide, please. So here are the two studies that I looked at. The Oregon State study walks through that, talks about this process of how far out does that copper go into the soil bed and what is the concentration, and then reinforced by the Maryland article. And both of those extension bulletins in Missouri, as well as these other states, are reviewed to make sure that they remain relevant and correct after a few years. So both of these were reviewed in 2024. So I have very high confidence in the information and the safety of pressure treated materials. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that may have popped up in the chat.
Hey, do we have any questions for Todd? Don't use CCA on picnic tables either. Yeah, that might be a good advice as well, for sure. All right. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate that information. I know you always want to get wood that doesn't rot and will hang around for a while. So that's good information to have with that. All right. So next on the ticket, we have Traven, who is going to talk to us about figs. And so Traven, looks like you are ready.
All right, so I'm gonna probably pick up where Katie left off. So hardy figs are one of probably the oldest, one of our oldest cultivated plants. They're even mentioned in biblically in some of the different religions. So not all, we can't grow all types of fig here in Missouri. Actually, we have to actually look at some different varieties. Because not all can take this cold weather that we just had the past week that Zack pointed out. So some of the varieties we could attempt are Chicago Hardy and Brown Turkey. So there are some other less common varieties that are said to be cold hardy, but I would say test it out on a small basis and see how they do for your area and for your microclimate. But we got to start off with a cold hardy variety, but we also need to do a little elbow grease, a little work, and a little TLC to get these guys through the winter. So one way you could do this was to grow them in actually a container and overwinter them in a unheated garage or space. But we'll go into more depth with that in the next couple slides. Figs prefer a pH of 6 to 6.5. Looking at their size, they do get fairly large if they are unrestricted. So if you do think about putting these out in the ground, I would say give them plenty of space, around 10 to 12 feet apart. And your rows apart, if you're doing multiple rows, that's going to really depend on your equipment. So make sure if you do have any big equipment or a mower, you can fit that through there. Starting out, figs actually do fairly well as a container variety. They actually, so looking at that, you could start out as a 1 gallon pot and then gradually go from a 3. A mature specimen would probably need about 15 gallons, but you want to increase that really gradually. You don't want to just throw a little twig or a cutting in a 15-gallon pot. They do prefer full sun. Looking at pollination, the varieties I have listed, Chicago Hardy and Brown Turkey, those are self-fruitful. Some of your specialty figs, and once you start propagating and be kind of a fig connoisseur, some of those specialty varieties do require a wasp to pollinate them. Looking at temperature, the hardy varieties, I would say about 15 to 20 degrees. If they're in a container, you want to kind of move those indoors. One thing I will mention on overwintering, and we'll dig a little bit deeper as we go on, is when we're overwintering, we want to do that in an unheated space, around 20 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because if we get over that 50 degrees, those plants are going to start to wake up and come out of dormancy. So let's talk about the amazing fruit. So this fruit is produced usually on the new growth, 1-year-old. Some varieties produce on 2-year-old wood. But you're going to actually see some pea-size figs, or a lot of people like to say figlets. Once you see that pea, it actually takes about 90 days to ripen. So if you are out midsummer, mid-July, and you see a bunch of those pea-size figs, if they're July and after, I would go ahead and just prune those off because they are not going to have enough time to ripen before we get to our first frost. And that's another challenge with the figs is getting those to ripen in enough time. As for fertilizer, we want to do probably a slow release fertilizer during the spring, something that's balanced to get us going off right. So now let's talk about the hard part, overwintering. Overwintering figs in containers is fairly easy, but things I would like to kind of make you aware of is you want to make sure to allow those plants to go fully dormant. What does this look like? Yellow leaves, and those leaves are also going to drop. If it's growing in the peak summertime, you may have an issue, but if it's starting to cool off, starting to get colder, this is a normal process. Move those guys indoors when the temperatures fall below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And I mentioned before, you want to store between 20 and 50 degrees. Unheated garage, they don't need light because they're going, they're dormant, they're deciduous. So looking at the temperatures above that 50 mark, they're going to say, hey, it's springtime. And then 4 months out till the last frost, you're going to be in trouble there. So kind of, I'll also mention too, when you're bringing those in, you don't want to bring them in too soon. There's kind of, kind of have to play with it a little bit to find that right time. Because if you bring it too early, if you bring it in too early, it can wake up on you. So looking at water, when they're overwintering, you want to kind of monitor that water, and only if that top 2 inches of media is dry, go ahead and water. But you want to kind of prevent overwatering so you don't get that root rot during the winter time. So overwinter in the ground. So if you don't want to have to fuss with another houseplant to bring in or bring out or put it in the garage, you can actually plant in a sheltered microclimate. So think about a south-facing structure or a wall. After that, you want to apply a really, really heavy mulch over those roots and around the drip line of that tree. Some cases, I've even seen folks tie the branches together or even bend them down to the ground to kind of get that mulch, get that coverage of that mulch. You can also cut back 8 to 12 inches above the ground. What's really easy, you could use chicken wire, is build a kind of cage and really pack it with leaves, with straw, with wood chips, some of those free materials that you could get in bulk to really pack it around there. Some folks just do the mulch, but if you do want an extra layer of security, I would say you could do burlaps or blankets or tarps. And you want to try to tarp it all the way down and secure it at that soil line, because that soil is actually going to act kind of like a heat battery. It's going to release some of that heat up, and kind of trapping that tarp with that heat is going to kind of help with that. Even if you do all those protections, you may still get a little bit of dieback. But don't worry. These hardy figs will actually start to grow back out from the roots. So this is kind of just a step-by-step process of kind of what that looks like. They started with, they cut it back. They first covered it with leaves, and so those leaves wouldn't fly away. They actually came back with a heavier layer of wood chips. So looking at pruning, I would say caution. The sap can cause some skin irritation. So I'd say always wear gloves when you're messing or pruning with the figs. You want to prune when dormant, when all the leaves are gone. The goal of pruning, you want to try to preserve and protect as much of that new growth. So the top 1/3 of the growth on the figs, that's where your fruit is. If you cut that back, say into the 2/3 section, you're actually going to be putting yourself about the fruit about 2 weeks behind. So the further down you cut, it's going to kind of delay that fruit production, maybe even up to a month. So again, the whole goal is for overwintering these guys here in Missouri is to protect that new growth. You do want to use thinning cuts. You don't want to top your tree or do that. You want to go back. You want to follow maybe a really long, maybe overgrown, follow it back to where it meets another branch and then make that cut there. You can also remove suckers from the base if you don't want those. And you can also pinch back 5 to 6 leaves from your shoots if you want to kind of control their heights. So for container, if you want to make it easy on yourself, you can train these to a single trunk about 15 to 18 inches tall. And then you can have that bush come out and train it from there. As a shrub form, this goes for container and also in ground. You want to pick mainly 3 to 5 strong branches of equal height. When they're in ground, once they do grow back, you want to remove any of the dead, diseased, damaged, downward facing, also disoriented branches. If they just look off, go ahead and prune those out. There has been some farmers and studying about different espalier methods. So you can do an espalier, or you can just do a main cordon, a single cordon, or a double, or even a triple cordon. So if you do want some more information on that, there is new research going out there. So this is an example of a espalier method of a fig. So you do use your two main branches. After they grow to a certain distance, you're slowly going to train those downward, and then you're going to space these upright shoots, usually about 12 to 14 inches apart, and that's going to develop your fruit. So in this case, as you can kind of see, looks like they are growing maybe in a greenhouse or protected structure to help these guys get through the winter. So as far as propagation, figs are fairly easy to propagate. These are taken from hardwood cuttings, so 1 to 2 year old wood. You want to make sure you have about 6 to 8 inches long. I've seen other folks get pretty small on there, just 1 or 2 nodes on their figs, but they have been successful. So I like to err on the side of caution and get about 3 to 4 nodes per cutting. You want to do pencil thick or larger. So these are some of the figs I took cuttings from. You can see some small ones there, some skinny ones, but I have some faith. You don't have to, but you can dip in root hormone. And what's really nice is I haven't done it yet in this photo, but you can wrap the top with parafilm to kind of help conserve that moisture. In this case, I have a really humid area for my pots. But those cuttings after that, you want to keep those fairly warm, around 70 degrees. And if you don't want to take some hardwood cuttings, you can also do ground layering. So I talked about earlier, some folks even dig up their fig tree, cut the roots on one side and lay it over and trench it, put it in a trench and mount it up. And then they set it back up in the spring. That's a little more intensive than I would want to go to save my fig tree, but that is another method. But you can also bend one of those branches and put some soil and mound it over and do some ground layering and also air layering. So figs are fairly easy to propagate. So here's a kind of a fig cutting, and they're pretty easy to root. So harvested and uses, this is probably my favorite slide because it looks so appetizing. You want to harvest those figs when they're fully ripe. When you touch those figs, they should just be a little soft. If they're really, really soft, they're overripe. This is where we struggle here in Missouri, is getting those fruits to that ripe stage. Once they're ripe, they won't ripen once they're picked. So that's our problem. They're great for fresh eating, for dried, using pastries, preserves, and jams. As a kid, I was obsessed with fig Newtons. So that's one of my things. Is eventually I'm going to get a fig tree and grow my own. They're great in salads and served with a pairing of cheese and drizzled with honey. All right, finishing up, some of the problems we don't have too many problems, but some of the potential pests could be root knot nematodes, scales, aphids, mealybugs, spider mites. And looking at the diseases, while dieback or cold injury, that dieback can actually cause a wound to invite other issues and bacteria and fungi to come in. That's why we put so much effort into overwintering and try to protect as much growth as we can. So that can also lead to anthracnose, leaf spots, rust, and blight. So I wish you well. That's all I have, and I'm so glad to have a little bit more of this warm weather come in our direction.
All right, thank you, Traven. That was really good information. I want to try some figs, so I may try to do that here soon. Have to find some cuttings. All right, let me finish up here. Everything's kind of wonky on my screen. I apologize, and thank you guys for hanging with me today. So if you want to save the chat, I think there were a few links that were dropped in there. You can go open your chat, go to the three little dots at the top, and then just click on Save Chat, like you see right here, and it will save it into your computer. Also, just a reminder that we have field specialists in horticulture that are scattered around the state, so feel free to reach out to any one of us or the one that's in your region. We will do our best to answer any questions that you might have. And then finally, our next meeting will be April 15th, noon to 1, and you can register at the site that you see here on your screen, and that will send you a link and a reminder the day of. So again, just to say thank you for being here and sharing your time with us today. We really appreciate your support, and we'll see you next month. Happy gardening in the meantime. Thank you. Bye-bye.